From the late 90s to the early 2010s, Nickelodeon was a factory for childhood nostalgia. Shows like iCarly, Victorious, Zoe 101, and Drake and Josh shaped an entire generation, all created or produced by one man, Dan Schneider. But behind the laugh tracks, quirky characters, and slime-covered stages, a darker story was brewing. Over the years, several child stars who once smiled on our TV screens have come forward to speak about what really went on behind the scenes at Nickelodeon, exposing toxic work environments, questionable behavior, and a system that many now say prioritized ratings over the well-being of kids. So how did one of the most powerful forces in kids TV become the center of one of the most uncomfortable conversations in entertainment? Let's talk about the rise and fall of Dan Schneider's Nickelodeon empire and the young actors who found the courage to speak out. Now, when you take a look at Dan Schneider's discography, he has produced some of the greatest shows Nickelodeon has ever produced. However, there is one thing that stands out with all of his shows, and that is sexualization of children. Now, I want to take a second away from the script just to truly say that a lot of his shows are some of the greatest shows, and on paper, he honestly didn't miss when you really look at it, but there was a lot of things that went on behind the scenes that kind of played a factor. And when you look at his career before Nickelodeon, you would see that he would try to make shows centered for adults. However, they would flop and they would be considered not funny to older audiences. And this would lead to the introduction of the show All That on Nickelodeon, started by him. And even though this is a little before my time, I would just want to say my older sisters did love that show. And also it led to some good shows like Kenan and Kel. Even though that show was also a little before my time, my older sisters liked that show as well. One thing that I say that was in my time was The Good Burger. I love that movie. And also The Amanda Show. I used to like that show as well. But now, when you look at a lot of his later hits, for example, Zoe 101, Victorious, and somewhat iCarly. I ain't gonna throw iCarly in there, but y'all get the point. A lot of these shows were very enticing to younger audiences. Also, it had the characters play roles younger than they really were. And it kind of makes sense why he gravitated towards a younger audience, because younger people tend to ask less questions. And also, younger viewers can't quite tell the difference between entertainment and pure lust. And what I mean by that is, a lot of these characters were sexualized for a reason. And it's even funny because now I'm going back getting information for this video, and I'm thinking to myself like, man, I remember being 9-10 years old watching Victorious, yet I couldn't even tell you the main storyline or plot of the show. And to be fair, when you look at that lineup, my ass was probably having wet dreams the whole damn show. You feel me? Like, y'all can't sit here and act like 90% of people who watch these shows didn't watch these for other reasons. But anyways, let's keep going. As time went on, more and more actors began speaking out about what it really was like working under Dan Schneider and the culture he helped create at Nickelodeon. A quote made by Jeanette McCurdy, who played as Sam on iCarly in the show Sam and Cat. And in her book titled I'm Glad My Mom Died, she refers to Dan Schneider only as the creator, who also quoted, "The creator made me cry in a wardrobe fitting once. I was trying on a denim miniskirt and he said, whoa, 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 hold up. Sam's not a whore." Other actors like Daniela Monet from Victorious also pointed to decisions that felt wrong, especially when it came to how young girls were dressed, filmed, and directed. Hush money and fear culture. Jeanette McCurdy also revealed that after her time at Nickelodeon, she was offered $300,000 on the condition that she never speak publicly about her experiences. "I was offered hush money, $300,000 to never speak publicly about my experiences at Nickelodeon," she says. She refused, but it raises the question, how many other former child stars were pressured into silence? Another major voice came from Zoe 101 actress Alexa Nicholas, who has been one of the most vocal critics of Nickelodeon and Dan Schneider. "Nickelodeon was not a safe space for children, it was a breeding ground for trauma," she says. "I did not feel safe around Dan Schneider, I literally had to cry to get off that set," she also stated. Alexa has protested outside of Nickelodeon's headquarters demanding accountability. Her movement, Eat Predators, calls out powerful networks that protect abusive behavior under the guise of entertainment.
Didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like Nickelodeon was protecting me or had my best interest in mind. And so after hearing so many different stories from different Nick stars, it just feels like enough is enough. And so we're here today trying to make a change in Nickelodeon. It's pretty triggering to be here at Nickelodeon today. I didn't even sleep last night. But I mean, I think anyone is redeemable if they actually do the right things moving forward, but they haven't even given a comment. And I find that just really awful because Jeanette and all of us deserve an apology. We really do.
What do you want to see from Nickelodeon going forward?
Well, I definitely don't want to hear one more story of a Nick star having a traumatic experience, that's for sure. I want no more NDAs. That's pretty much what ePredators is about. We're done with NDAs, no more silencing in there. We want to know what's happening in there so we can actually help if needed.
Yeah.
We can't participate in any type of help if we don't know what's going on in there. And all of these corporations keep silencing people with NDAs, and it's like enough is enough. You know? I want them to apologize to all the Nick stars that suffered in any type of way. Any kind of childhood trauma that came from this network, I would like them to take accountability and say they're sorry. I think that's simple, and we shouldn't have to beg for that in any way, you know?
Yeah.
In 2018, Dan Schneider suddenly cut ties with Nickelodeon. While the official story cited mutual decisions and a desire to pursue other projects, behind the scenes, an internal investigation reportedly uncovered complaints about his behavior, including verbal outbursts and questionable creative decisions. No legal charges were filed, and Schneider later re-emerged in a 2021 interview claiming he had done nothing wrong, but the damage and the trauma was already done.
Now, Dan is speaking out.
Working for Dan was like being in an abusive relationship.
I wish I could go back and never, ever feel like it was okay to be an
One of Dan's cast members, Drake Bell, the star of Drake and Josh, was sexually abused by the show's dialogue coach, Brian Peck. He was 15.
The abuse was extensive, and it got pretty brutal.
I did not hire Brian Peck. And when Drake and I talked and he told me what had happened, I was more devastated by that than anything that ever happened to me in my career thus far.
Dan also addresses allegations he made inappropriate requests to his young stars and staff for on-set massages.
It was almost always a female, and it was often one from the wardrobe department.
It was wrong. It was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position.
Dan was also accused of overlooking actors of color in his series.
Diversity has always been very important to me in my shows.
I grew up on all that.
Brian Hearn and Giovanni Samuels are former Nickelodeon stars. While they both hold no hard feelings against their former boss today, they did, however, often feel uncomfortable on his sets.
It was the mention of my skin color as charcoal that was like the first damaging thing that I experienced.
That you're still thinking about in your 30s.
Yeah.
Right. And I had some discriminatory things happen. I've heard a hairstylist say, I don't know what to do with these things. This is not things, this is my hair.
I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
Many of the actors who came up through Schneider's shows have faced lasting emotional and psychological struggles. Some, like Ariana Grande and Victoria Justice, have stayed largely quiet, but others like McCurdy and Nicholas have used their platform to advocate for change.
That happens to me a lot. So now, just for fun, I'm gonna say 3 sentences that I bet not one person has ever said before in the history of mankind. Sentence number 1. Oh man, my uvula got stuck between that hamster's toes. See? That could never happen, because your uvula is that swingy thing in the back of your throat right here. So there's no way you could get it stuck between a hamster's toes. Could not.
We were so young, and there was a lot of pressure to be perfect, to keep quiet, smile, and keep going, said Victoria Justice. And maybe that's the point. These shows looked fun, the characters were wild and loud and full of personality, but the people playing them, many were just kids, dealing with grown-up pressure in a system that rarely cared. Which brings us back to the question, how much are we willing to excuse in the name of childhood entertainment? And how many more voices are still waiting to be heard? As more stories come to light, it's becoming clear that the smiling faces we saw on screen were often hiding pain, pressure, and trauma behind the scenes. Dan Schneider may have been the face of a Nickelodeon era, but it's the voices of the child stars, now grown, that deserve to be heard. This conversation isn't about cancel culture. It's about accountability, change, and protecting the next generation of entertainers. If you grew up watching these shows, this probably wasn't the reality you imagined, but maybe now we can finally separate the nostalgia from the truth. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more deep dives like this. Stay safe, stay awake, and take care of your inner child.